Welcome, everybody. Welcome to today's live stream. My name is Israel, and what we're going to be talking about on today's live stream is Song of Solomon, chapter 5. This is the second part in a short two-part series where we are basically getting into what the Bible actually says in regards to husbands. Then that was yesterday. That was the last part of the series. This part of the series, which is part 2, we're going to be looking at this from our wives' perspectives. And ultimately what we're going to be doing is we're going to be basically looking today at how wives should basically speak about their husbands. So just to give you some context before we get into today's content and today's material, yesterday was significantly about how a husband should speak to his wife, right? And we looked at a couple of different examples. We got deep into the text was actually covering from Song of Solomon chapter 4, and we were able to unpack and really unravel a lot of just what the scripture says, but also the nuances. And again, that will be the aim for today's live stream as well. Okay, so there's a couple of things before we get into it. I mentioned this on yesterday's live stream. That stream is in the description box as well already, if you want to consider watching that after, or even in fact if you want to watch that before you watch this, to kind of take them in order. But I mentioned yesterday on yesterday's live stream, the fact of the matter is this is specifically for husbands and wives. This doesn't mean that people that are in an unmarried state cannot benefit from this, especially if you think about this more so not only just from yourself, from your own personal standpoint. What do I mean by that? Well, we talked about different examples. Well, maybe you know someone who is married, and maybe you know a husband, maybe you know a wife. These are the kind of things you can share out with those kind of people in order to help them obviously get a benefit. Maybe at one point you may be married in the future. This is something that you can look at in regards to preparation and things like that. There's multiple different scenarios. Maybe you might meet someone who may actually ultimately at some point actually get the benefit of some of the things we're going to talk about. Hey Ecosmios, thanks for tuning in. Let's basically just get into it, right? So again, if you've got any questions, and this is another thing I'll say as well, if you've got any questions on the specific topic, feel free to leave them in the chat. We can basically try and work through them at some point, God willing, before we wrap up today in the session. So you should be able to hear me properly. You should be able to see me clearly. Just let me know in the chat just to make sure everything is cool on my end and I don't need to change anything. If it's too loud, let me know. I might turn it down. If you want me to turn it up, I'll try and turn it up as well. All right, so we're trying to focus on sticking on topic, right? I say this most of the times in live streams, and it's really significant. I don't want you to be distracted by different comments that basically may arise at different times, especially if they're off topic, right? From the moment you hear my voice, there's things out there, forces out there that don't want you to actually learn what we're basically talking about, right? So try and stay on topic, try and stay focused. The topic of today's video is what we're talking about: wives, how wives should speak to about their husbands, right? So really and truly, any comments, any questions that are not specific to that topic are ultimately a distraction. So the fact of the matter is, thanks to Ecosmios for just confirming the audio and all of that stuff. The fact of the matter is, you have to remember, there's no rush in certain aspects, right? The book of Song of Solomon, just like any book in the Bible, is there for anyone to read, for anyone to teach on, for anyone to ask questions about, and ultimately get answers, right? So just because we don't cover something in today's live stream, just because I don't cover a particular question, that's got no bearing. That has no real relevance ultimately in the bigger scheme of things in regards to what the Bible actually says. There's so many Bible tutors out there, there's so many resources out there today. We can really understand what the Bible's saying in so many different ways, right? So just think about it from that perspective. Ultimately, we're not talking about, let's say for example, the specific doctrine all the way through the book of Songs of Solomon. This isn't what this short series is about. Another thing is, we're not necessarily spending much time garnering who specifically are the characters. The only significant thing we need to proceed with this series, right, part 1 and part 2, or volume 1 and volume 2, is that it's a husband, which we know, and a wife, right? Because we've seen words that that point to that effect. We've seen words like spouse, etc. Right? So your spouse, generally, the most basic use of that word is obviously a marital partner. So we know this is a husband and a wife. Whether you think it's someone else, whether you think there's someone specifically who it is, that is irrelevant to the topic. So let's not waste time today focusing on things that are relevant to the topic. We've got one goal, one agenda, that's to look at how wives can speak about their husbands, right? So let's basically jump into it. One thing I'll say, which I think is actually quite interesting as well, right, is we talked about this yesterday, and there were people in the live chat who were basically making this known as well, is that yesterday's live stream, part 1 of this series, was all about men, right? How husbands speak to their wives. Notice, if you haven't already, when I kind of like previewed it yesterday, is the difference about today is we're not necessarily talking about or giving you advice or getting into like teaching about how wives should basically speak to their husbands. We're getting into something deeper, different, which is how wives should speak about their husbands. And it's nuanced, but we'll see and realize today like what specifically I'm talking about, how this actually makes sense, right? We talked yesterday, there was comments in the comment section about how wives like really appreciate a compliment from their husband. And this is why we spent yesterday going through some of these things, and we saw multiple layers, multiple levels of like complimentary statements from a husband to his wife. And ultimately, like, it wasn't really the kind of thing we see today from the most part, right? For the most part, these were things like Solomon went through like his wife's eyes, right? Her temples, her neck, her hair. He went through obviously some common things which we know today, which I mentioned in yesterday's live stream as well, like her breast. He mentioned multiple different things. And towards the end, I remember one of the statements was, I believe it was Ecos, it was like, this is raunchy, right? And these were the kind of things we got to. And this is why it's significant all the time to kind of highlight and remember that, look, this isn't something the Bible's teaching for everyone to kind of enjoy. This is specifically based on God's perfect will desired for a husband and a wife, a man and a woman to enjoy for themselves, right? So we got questions about, well, should this be in the Bible? Should this not be in the Bible, etc.? And clearly, I believe the general consensus for the most part was yes. This is very beneficial for husbands, for wives, for married couples, for people that are looking to marriage, to kind of see the intensity that can be like visible in a marriage if you put the work in and you actually take that time, right? So if you think about it from that perspective, it does give us a lot of insights. I believe it is definitely very beneficial. Again, we talked about, there was questions yesterday about, what does the Book of Song of Solomon actually mean? Again, this isn't really like the significance of the live stream today. Like I said, we're going bare basics. Just taking a basic read through these 2 chapters, this small piece of text, with an objective. Husbands, you talk to your wives like this. Wives, you talk about your husbands like this. Now, why is this nuanced, right? Why aren't we not talking about wives speaking to their husbands in a certain way? Again, this doesn't mean that husbands, right, can't speak about their wives in common kind of the ways we're talking about today, right? It doesn't mean that. This isn't a like conclusive series in a sense. This is the only thing a husband can do in regards to communication, and this isn't a conclusive only scenario for wives in regards to husbands. But why should we focus on it from this perspective? One thing we're focusing on is this, right? The thing about guys, and I mentioned this yesterday, I mentioned this previously in today's live stream as well, women generally like compliments, right? Now, this isn't to say that husbands do not like compliments as well. They do. But another thing that you'll find that husbands generally like is husbands like to be praised, right? And I guess some may say, well, it's like, it may be like, some will say, well, look, it might just be pride that men have, right? That they want to be praised and they want to be lifted up. Fire for God says he's looking forward to part 2. Me too. Thanks for the comment. And you think about it from this perspective, right? Men really like to be complimented, but they like to be complimented to others, right? Maybe because it's something that feels like men can elevate themselves as people are basically encouraging them, speaking good about them. But again, when a wife basically compliments her husband, yes, he probably likes that. But when she compliments her husband, like in public, for example, or to other people, like that is the kind of thing that will make a husband like even more excited, right, than just a basic compliment, right? So this is what we're going to talk about, and I believe that what we cover in today's video, in this piece of text, will kind of give us some insights, because one of the best things a wife can do for a husband, right, is like allow him to see that his wife believes in him, right? Like husbands obviously want people to believe in them, just like everyone does. But I don't know what it is about a husband and a wife relationship where a husband will definitely like be looking at his wife to be like, look, like if you believe, like it's almost like, yeah, everyone else can believe. And some people may look at that as the different ways you can look at that. Some people say, well, that's a negative. Like why would it be so hard for your wife to believe opposed to someone else? Well, no one says that all of these things are always going to make the most sense, but that's generally just a lot of the way men work. Maybe it's because from a man's perspective, a wife probably sees the insights that maybe some other people don't. They see a lot of the weaknesses and the infirmities, all those kind of things that maybe the odd person may not see. But a husband who is praised publicly, or is spoken about publicly, or spoken about to others in a specific way, is really significant. And we're going to see a very good example of this in regards to what we read today. So much so to the point that the words that the wife speaks impacts people around and shows you how significant, how convincing the compliments actually were. All right. So before we jump into the text, we've given you a lot of groundwork, especially for those of you who haven't watched part 1 yet, or may not watch part 1 for whatever reason. Now, let's get into some of the context to kind of pick up where we left off in yesterday's live stream, in part 1 of the live stream, which was about husbands, right? So we ended, like I said previously, we got to some really raunchy, really intense like events, right? We talked about the husband describing his wife as like a garden that's enclosed, like a private garden. And in that garden, there was ultimately like chief spices, very good spices, very nice fruit, all of these different kind of things, right? And we saw all of these things and they gave us really good context. And it got to the intensity where it was basically talking about the wife basically came along and she basically said, well, okay, cool. Like, this is her husband's garden. She was talking about how the winds should basically blow upon her garden, right? And ultimately how her husband should basically enter into his garden and basically enjoy his pleasant fruits. Now, when we kind of pushed forward into today's text, and we're probably going to do this again today, just push forward to a further piece of text as well, just to kind of tie in the context, right? To drive home the lesson we're talking about in today's video. But then at the same time, hey, Mr. Somebody, hope you're doing well. But then at the same time, you have to think about it from this perspective. Like, he now comes forward and says, look, as you can see, he says he came into the garden, right, of his spouse. And he's talking about how he gathered the myrrh and the spice. And we talked about how these were examples, right, previously from the previous text, right? And we could see he was likening his wife, and he was talking about his wife as this garden, right, with, like I said, spices. And he talked about honeycomb and honey being certain things which were like on her lips and in her mouth, right? And he talks about drinking wine, and obviously milk were also synonymous. And we kind of wrapped up with the wife basically highlighting and saying, look, like, this is something that is for them to enjoy. As she says, look, drink. And she says, drink abundantly, oh beloved. So this wasn't just a like, okay, one-time thing. This was something that was like desired to be regular. Okay, and it really got intense. Okay, without just spelling a lot of this stuff out in its like most basic form. But if you kind of read the context of certain things, and just to kind of foreshadow a lot of this stuff, we're going to get into more intensity today, right? And again, I said this yesterday. Sometimes you may be reading these things and just be thinking like wow, did he really say that? Did she really say that? And it's like, not because it's necessarily bad, right? I talked about this as well. Like husbands and wives, these things shouldn't be like an embarrassment. These things shouldn't be something that you shy away from. These should be things that you look at and you're like, okay, like this is one of the benefits that God created us for as under a marriage covenant, right? This is for a husband and a wife, a man and a woman to enjoy as one of the benefits God has actually given us. So if you think about it from this perspective, like in that setting, it should be like simple. We read about in Genesis, Adam and Eve, they were in the Garden of Eden, right? They were naked, right? And they were unashamed. And if you think about it from that perspective, that's ultimately how a husband and a wife should actually be. They should be able to be like naked and unashamed, so to speak, right? So if you think about it from that perspective, ultimately that's the end goal for anyone who is married. All right. So let's now basically start to unpack this from the wife's perspective. And a couple of things you will notice. We're going to get sort of like what I can reference as like the prologue or the pretext. There's certain insights into the narrative which aren't necessarily about the woman necessarily speaking about her husband, right? She speaks specifically like about him in a certain way, but those aren't the things we want to focus on heavily. So we'll probably read through it, right? Not spend the most time on it, because again, like I said, this isn't a Song of Solomon through Bible study where we're looking for all of these different layers of context. That's something I always advise you to do for yourself ultimately. But because this isn't in that regard, I'm not going to be able to like or spend much time on those kind of things. This is specifically about how she speaks about him in a particular setting, right? But just notice, we ended yesterday, like I said, talking about just the climax, no pun intended, of what was going on, right, in regards to the husband entering the garden, etc., and all those kind of things, right, and enjoying the pleasant fruits. Now what we see as we continue, what does it say? So she begins speaking and she says she sleeps, but her heart waketh. The voice of her beloved that knocketh, right? So she's sleeping, she says, but her heart awakes to the voice of her beloved knocking, right? Again, and she goes straight in with just the intensity, right? And she says, look, she's waking to knocking, and it says, open to me, my sister. So obviously this is the husband speaking, right? My love, my dove, my undefiled, for my head is filled with dew. And he says, my locks with the drops of the night. Then what does he say next? Okay. He says, I have put off my coat. How shall I put it on? I have washed my feet. And how shall I defile them, right? Now, notice this. So follow along with just the context of just these lines that we're reading, right? And just notice. So they've just had this huge crescendo ultimately, right? I won't use the word, the C word I used previously. Okay, I've kind of used that maybe one too many times already. But they've had that. Now it says she sleeps, her heart awakes to the voice of her beloved knocking, right? And this is what he's saying, so to speak. Basically, he's come. Basically, he's knocking on the door, as she describes it, right? And what does he say? Look, like, let me in, ultimately, right? Now, the reason this is interesting, if you think about it, if we just go back, right? We can go, or I won't go back to the previous chapter, but ultimately, I mentioned this already. She said, come into the garden, right? He said he came into the garden, he's enjoyed the myrrh and the spices and eaten of the honeycomb and all these different kind of things, all basically allusions to previous things that were actually said. This is why it's good to read scriptures ultimately, just not just one line and all those kind of things, but there's context. We've got videos about that. It's one of them in the description box towards the bottom of the description, if you want to consider watching that after this live stream as well. But notice, he's knocking, saying, look, he's taken off his coat, like, Why is he going to put it on again? Ultimately, he's talking basically about like now traveling again, like going somewhere else, like this, like I'm here. I don't want to basically go back out, right? And then what does she say? She says, her beloved put in his hand by where? By the hole, right? Some of you may read some of these things and be like, okay, like what hole is she talking about, right? I'll leave it at that for now, right? But notice most of the scripture in a lot of ways is really, in my opinion, self-explanatory, especially if you follow the context, right? From especially what happened previously about him entering into the garden. But what does she say? Her beloved put in his hand by the hole. And what does she say happened when he did this? And her bowels were what? Were moved for him, right? And then what does she say next? She rose up to open to her beloved, and her hands dropped. Myrrh and her fingers, sweet smelling myrrh, upon the handles of the lock, right? So notice, she's saying she's asleep, her heart wakes up to the voice of her beloved knocking basically at a door, for example, right? And then she basically goes on to say, look, her husband, right, put her hand, right, by the hole. And when he did this, it talks about how her bowels, obviously your bowels are like your insides, the real insides of your stomach, so to speak, right? Her bowels were moved for him. So whatever he's doing to her, like, she likes it first and foremost, right? But it's also attracting her to him more, right? It's, as it's saying, she's moved for him first and foremost. Now it says, now she rose up to open, right? Obviously she's talking about this door that she's describing to her beloved, and her hands dropped myrrh. Again, these are allusions, good allusions to previous things, right? And her fingers, sweet smelling myrrh. What does she say? Upon the handles of the lock, right? So again, it goes back to him putting his hand in the hole of this door, so to speak, her bowels being basically moved for him. She now is arising to her beloved, and her hands are dropping ultimately. And what does it say next? It says her hands dropped myrrh, and her fingers sweet smelling myrrh upon the handles of the lock. Now what does she say next, which is really interesting? She says she opened to her beloved, right? She says she opened to her beloved. She said she opened to her beloved. And what happens? She says, but her beloved had withdrawn himself, was gone. Her soul failed when he spake. She sought him, but she could not find him. She called him, but she gave him no answer. Then it goes on. She says, the watchmen that went about the city found me. They smote her, they wounded her. The keepers of the walls took away her veil from her. Then she says, before we even get into this, one thing I'll say, which I think is interesting, is I've mentioned this previously. And the reason I'm mentioning some of these things previously as well is because I want to give you clues to not just get carried away with specific things that I mentioned in these particular lines. This description, this scenario with the watchman is not a new scenario in the book of Song of Solomon. If you go earlier in the book of Solomon, previously from before we covered in part 1 of the series, the watchmen are there previously as well, right? So this isn't some new introduction. This is a new introduction of the watchmen, so to speak, into this scenario, right? Just for the record. And what does she say? She says a clear statement, a significant statement that is flooded generally several times through the book of Song of Solomon. She says, I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my beloved, that you tell him that I sick of love, right? So this is kind of the prelude to what I was basically mentioning previously in regards to the text that I want to focus on specifically, right? Because she's ultimately now again risen. She's raised this scenario. She's raised this statement, the daughters of Jerusalem. Like I said, you see this several times throughout the book of Song of Solomon. But she's saying, look, like, if you find my beloved, right, tell him that she's sick of love. Some people today call it love sick, ultimately, right? There's different variations, there's different ways that people will reference this, ultimately, right? But ultimately, it's someone deeply in love. And you can kind of see just from the words already that people have said, like what one person said opposed to the other person, you can basically see just how significant like her mindset is towards this stuff, right? So if you think about it from that perspective, like they're clearly in this in a serious way. So again, the reason I said there's a kind of pretext, kind of preludes, because she's talking about him, but it kind of really flows in regards to the narrative of where we kind of left off in regards to just this intense like events between the two, right? In regards to their relationship. Now then, at the same time, now we've read all this to get to really the main text of how wives should speak about their husbands, because we're going to see something next which I think is really significant, right? So notice this. What does the scripture say next? We get a sort of pause in this back and forth, but we see something really interesting, right? What is it? We see a question posed. And what's that question? We ultimately see this question posed, which is right here. And what does it say? The question is, what thy beloved more than beloved, O thou fairest among women? What thy beloved more than beloved, that thou dost so charge us, right? So the question ultimately that I've highlighted is, you're now giving us these insights, right? These are the things. He's knocking on the door. Ultimately, he's putting his hand through the hole. He's basically moving her in her bowels for him. All of these things are going on, right? And then she's going around. She's having another encounter with these watchmen, right? She's now talking to these daughters of Jerusalem again, right? Again, similar theme throughout the whole Song of Solomon, ultimately. And the question is posed, like, you're saying all of these things. You're saying, like bring the guy back to you. Like, you're highlighting this scenario, right? Well, what's so special about him? Like, why is he so special? And hopefully now you can start to see where we're going to try and go with this ultimately. But what she will do next is basically present a case, because the question is posed. Your beloved, like, why is he so special? What's so good about him opposed to another person's or someone else's, right? I notice the scripture here renders it. It says, look, she's the fairest among women. Now, look what she says as she begins to go on. And it's not even more so the things that are said next. It's how this kind of piece of context here kind of wraps up. And we'll get to that, obviously, before we wrap up, God willing, right? But what does she say? She goes on, right? So the question is, what's so special about your beloved that you're basically like commanding us, you're basically instructing us, informing us to basically find him out, right? And what does she say? She says, my beloved, white and ruddy, the chiefest among 10,000s, right? So first and foremost, bear in mind, she isn't necessarily saying this to her beloved, right? This is what the daughters of Jerusalem were asking her. So she's basically, at bare minimum, you'd assume, speaking to them, these women, right? And what does she say? She gives some sort of description. But one of the things she says, which is interesting, because I assume there's many people out there that are these characteristics, right? But how many would you categorize like this, right? if you're the chiefest, what does that mean? That means you're really significant, right? And she's saying this to these women, like, her beloved is the chiefest among 10,000. So in a auditorium, in a stadium full of 10,000 people, her beloved in her mind is the most important. He's the most significant, right? And imagine a husband hearing that his wife is speaking about him in this manner, whether he's there or whether he's not there. But the fundamental fact about this is, which I think is really significant, is what's it showing us? It's like, this is her mindset. She's now giving her mindset publicly. Her man, her husband is the most important among 10,000. Right? That's what she believes. And not only that's what she believes inwardly, she believes it enough to say it outwardly. And this is a lesson for not only for wives, but this is a lesson for many of us to really realize that, look, like, there is a benefit in saying certain things, right? But there's also a benefit in actually, like, talking about these things publicly, talking about them outwardly. It's ultimately the next level of confidence in these scenarios, when you not only believe them things inwardly, but you actually manifest them out publicly. So for her to say this publicly is a great thing. Like, imagine husbands out there that are on the live stream, even myself included. Obviously, I'm a husband, right? And I think to myself, well, how would it make me feel if I heard that my wife was saying, look, amongst all these people, like, he's the most significant. Like, I may know that or believe that anyway, but we talked about this yesterday, right? In regards to the compliments a husband makes to his wife. He can compliment her. There's nothing wrong with saying the same compliment again. Is she going to, like, love him less because he compliments her again? No, because we talked about most people, not only just women, enjoy being complimented. So hearing things that you believe, right, already are not necessarily like a bad thing. They can actually be very beneficial and actually can be a good thing. So just notice how she described him first and foremost, right? Really, really powerful. Now, what does she say next? Like, again, we talked about this previously as well. This isn't just about, like, you're not exempt ultimately. It doesn't mean a wife is exempt from talking about physical features. There's nothing wrong with that, right? But again, just notice some of the nuances. So what does she say? She says his head, the most fine gold, right? Synonymous with, like, royalty, right? Which Solomon obviously was. Now she says, his locks are bushy. So we're getting some insights into some of the physical descriptions of her beloved, right? And she says his hair was bushy and also black as a raven. Now, what does she say next, which I think is actually quite interesting, right? What does she say? She says his eyes as of doves by the rivers of waters, washed with milk, fitly set. Now, why is this significant? For those of you who were paying attention yesterday, you'd know why her saying this is significant, right? Because ultimately, what do we see? We can go back. And what did we see yesterday? When he was talking, what did he say? What did he say about her eyes? Right? Similar thing, right? Some of you, like I said, who were paying attention yesterday would have picked this up already and would have noticed the similarities. Even if you read through previously, if you read after, or previously, especially, if I remember correctly, like, this whole dove's eyes is not a new thing. You see it previously, even before what we covered yesterday, in yesterday's session, right? About part 1 from a husband's perspective. But notice this, like, there's nothing wrong in you giving your spouse the same compliments that they've given you. obviously it should make sense, and if it doesn't, then obviously I wouldn't recommend you be doing that. But you can see those examples ultimately as well. Now, what else do we see? Let's continue, right? As we go back, we basically see some more insights. Excuse me. She goes to his cheeks, right? And what does she say? She says, his cheeks as a bed of spices, sweet flowers, his lips lilies, dropping sweet smelling myrrh. So a lot of this stuff is similar to things we heard on part 1 of this session, right? And again, I said this yesterday, I said this to start this live stream, like, let's make sure we focus on the topic, right? What is the topic of today's session? We're talking about how a wife can speak about her husband in order to maintain a marriage, in order to benefit a marriage, in order to keep a marriage from disintegrating, from burning down, right? So whether you think other things about Song of Solomon or about the text is irrelevant to today's specific topic. And again, let's not allow ourselves to be distracted. There's obviously people that need what we're talking about today, hence why we're doing it, and ultimately let's allow ourselves to get the ultimate benefit. But let's continue, right? So she says, his hands gold rings set with the beryl, his belly bright overlaid sapphires. And we can read that again. His hands as gold rings set with the beryl, his belly bright ivory overlaid sapphires. And again, I don't want to do an injustice to what she's saying in these scenarios, because ultimately we spent a lot of time in yesterday's live stream talking about like bigging up the husband for a lot of the nuance and the deep layers in regards to the compliments of the wife, right? Maybe the reason I spent so much time on that is because generally in a lot of cases it's not necessarily the woman that has a problem opening up and expressing themselves to the other half, right? It's generally the husband who has a problem or doesn't know how to like express himself and his thoughts and his desires. This is why it's so powerful when a husband actually does these things, because in a lot of ways it's not so common, especially in today's day and age, right? So these are words that you can say, and obviously things you can think in order to have you thinking in the right mindset in regards to your marriage, but also speaking in the right mindset and speaking the right things in regards to a marriage as well. So you think about it from that perspective, that will obviously be beneficial as well. So notice this, she's complimenting him, she's going deep, right? I highlighted yesterday just some of the nuance, some of the examples. He was talking about the eyes, he was talking about her lips, he was talking about her hair, he was talking about her temples, right? He was talking about her neck, her breast. He went through so many different parts, right, to build his case, and she's going in like manner. And it's really significant, even if we feel like, okay, cool, like this comes more easier to a wife to do, right? Maybe, right? Even if that's the case, that doesn't necessarily mean we should disregard these things, right? From both perspectives. A husband doesn't necessarily need to rubbish a wife's compliments towards him or about him because it may be easier for her to do so. That doesn't matter. Like, you still reverence, you still appreciate those things. But then at the same time, just because these things are potentially much easier for a woman to express to a husband, she should still, like, you can see, is still going deep, the extra mile, right? And she's got her own bag of like examples and similes and metaphors that she's drawing from in order to paint the message of her beloved, as she so frequently calls him, right? So she says, and we ended up talking about his belly, bright ivory overlaid with sapphires, right? And that can give multiple different illusions as well, right? But notice, it's like, I kind of said this already. If we go back quickly, or I won't even go back, but you can see like there was a huge scenario of things he said. And again, this is why the book as a whole is actually really beneficial, but to kind of see these things. But notice, like, she's gone through her different body parts. What does she talk about? She talked about his skin. She talked about his stature, right? He's the chief among 10,000. She talked about his head. She talked about his hair. She talked about his eyes. She talked about his cheeks. She talked about hands. And I remember, like, for those of you who were here on yesterday's live stream, like, notice I was highlighting certain things. I was saying, like, he's going deep. Like, how many husbands do you see? And I reference this, like, complimenting his wife's temples. Like, really, like, that's, many of us will say, like, that's out there, but you can see the commitment and the true love he actually had for her, right? But then at the same time, we talked about not only the temples, we talked about, well, he's complimenting her neck. I missed this one in the previous examples, bringing up the things I've talked about today. But one thing I camped on a little bit yesterday was, what else did he highlight? He highlighted her teeth. Her teeth, guys. And it's like, these are different things which are nuanced. And you can see some of these things here, like in regards to her perspective. So for example, it's like, she's highlighting his cheeks, right? And it's like, you think about some things like that, it's like, she's going in, right? She's highlighting his hands. She talked about his hands, which I guess that's not even a surprise because she spoke about that previously. He's putting his hands in the door, right? In the hole, should I say, as she said previously. And that's moving her in her bowels. So clearly she lacks his hands, right? But she's still mentioning his hands. She's talking about his belly, right? Imagine, like, we know today, in the day and age we live in, like, guys generally like compliments about their bellies. Why? You want to start talking about the six-pack and all those different kind of things. One thing I can say now as well, which I think is actually quite significant before we get to some of the other things that she says, right, is like, when you look at these kind of things, right, you have to understand that, or let me even come back to that. I'll come back to that, God willing, right? So notice this. What does she say next? She says, his legs, pillars of marble, right? She's going for the legs, set upon sockets of fine gold. And she says, his countenance as Lebanon. We talked about this, yesterday, in the stream yesterday. And what was we talking about? We were talking about how Lebanon, I was mentioning this as well, Lebanon comes up multiple times. And if you think about it from this perspective, it makes sense in the context of Solomon, because if you read about things Solomon did, I talked about this yesterday, one of the things he built was the Forest of Lebanon, the house of the Forest of Lebanon, which is something you see in like Kings and different places that cover Solomon's activities and his life. So hearing certain things about Lebanon, we heard about Gilead and those kind of places which were known and would make sense in the context of some of the compliments. So if you're talking about different cattle from Gilead, that would make sense going back to stuff like Deuteronomy, where the 2.5 tribes stayed on the other side of Jordan in that land of Gilead and all those kind of places because they had much cattle, and that was a land of cattle, etc. Right? So you can see a lot of the nuances in these different kind of scenarios. So if you think about it from this perspective, she's going in herself in regards to all of these compliments, but again, she's not saying these things to him per se. She's saying these things to someone else, to other people, which boosts this up even further. Because again, like I said previously, when a husband hears that his wife is speaking about him in such a glowing manner, like, a husband definitely really enjoys that. Why? Because he feels good about himself ultimately, but he also feels even better about himself because he knows other people are hearing how good he is. Right? And we generally know men love to hear how good they are. Ultimately, this is why compliments to a husband can be very beneficial, because it's something that helps a husband generally quite a lot. It's not something that a husband necessarily would die without, but generally it's something very beneficial. So wives out there who are thinking about how they can like deliver messages to their husbands, one of the ways you can do that is just by thinking, okay, cool, like maybe your husband might not be as motivated right now about something, and it may be your job to just remind him that he is significant and he is worthwhile, he is profitable to you, and you can uplift him and talk about some of the positive things that he's actually doing or has done previously and can continue to do, right? So if you think about it from these perspectives, she's obviously giving all the nice details, oh, he's this, he's that, etc. But at the same time, think about this as well. So we talked about talking about the belly, right? This is what I was going to say previously. Just thank God for bringing it back to me, right? Is this. So one thing you have to notice is I talked about this, just preface this yesterday. It's really significantly. And that was this. Don't say things that are not true, right? Just because you see Solomon going in all layers of detail, I mentioned this yesterday, certain things he didn't mention. Also from the woman's perspective, right? His spouse, as he calls her, she is saying certain things about him, right? There's obviously certain things she may not mention, right? She's mentioned from just a basic understanding of it, certain things that he does that pleases her, right? Sexually. We've kind of really ended and really started today's scriptural breakdowns talking about those kind of things. But she also talks about how, like, there's certain things in regards to looks that she really appreciates, right? But then at the same time, notice this. This is what I want to say, right? Don't lie, firstly. I mentioned that yesterday. Now, the second thing to this is, if you are married, right, one thing you should consider is ultimately that, like, there's nothing wrong if it doesn't take away from, like, your devotion and your relationship with God. If you are going to put yourself in a situation where you can be getting yourself into a better, like, shape, in better physique for your spouse, right? Husband or wife, ultimately. Like, and I said this yesterday, a wife or a husband, don't lie, like, compliment, right? You can compliment. There's good things about everyone. And your job is to highlight those good things and make them known. Or if there isn't something bad, if there was something bad, so to speak, something bad or something you don't like, well, what can you do? There's a couple of things you can do. You can pray about it. You can commit them to prayer. Let's say, for example, your spouse is overweight, right? You still love them regardless, right? But you know that it'd most likely be, like, you'd be more pleased, more enjoyable. It'll be more enjoyable for you with your spouse if they were in better shape, right? What's one thing you can do? You can commit those things to prayer, right? Now, again, we've talked about this multiple times in regards to, like, prayers, like getting your prayers answered to God, from God, right? I talk about this heavily in the current, like health/weight series that I've been putting out over recent months. Just talking about my 40+ pound weight loss, right? Over pretty much, that happened over the last 12 months only, really in a 4 to 6 month window pretty much. But I've talked about this heavily. Like, one thing you shouldn't do is make the mistake of praying for the wrong things, because one of the things I highlighted, right, significantly, and I've written an article about this on our website, inthatword.com, right? I'll post it to you in a second, right? But one thing I want you to understand is, you want to be praying the right things. You want to, like, don't go around and say, look, like God, I pray my husband, for example, or my wife gets a 6-pack, right? Really, in a lot of ways, like, it's not really biblical, to be honest. for you to pray a prayer like that. But there ultimately are things that you can do which could ultimately make some of those things a reality, right? Because Moses posting the weight loss playlist, right? But there's ultimately things you can do which can maybe bring about those kind of scenarios, right? And this article, I'll put it here for those of you who want to read it after the live stream or whatever, like, is beneficial because I basically break down like how to pray the right way and how prayer was a big part of just me getting in much better shape, right? Which obviously I appreciate, but I also know my wife appreciates me being in a lot better shape anyway. So, and we joke about all the time, like even me more so, I say certain things like how could you love me like really like 40 pounds heavier? Like, but we talked about this previously, right? Like, it doesn't mean you won't love them, but I'm not going to say she loves me even more now, but at the same time, it's like our marriage is even better now because of those kind of things. But ultimately, think about it like this. You can be praying, okay, maybe not, okay, God, give my husband or give my wife a six pack, but you can say, okay, like, okay, God, like the Bible says that we should be disciplined. So I pray that my husband you'd pray, a husband will pray for the wife will pray for the husband and say, look, like, I pray that their spouse can be more disciplined in regards to food choices, in regards to drinking choices, right? In regards to the time you sleep, like in regards to loads of different things, which aren't necessarily praying about a six pack, but can do things like, if God will answer those prayers, because those are biblical prayers, right? And in those scenarios, you are basically like helping the spouse ultimately in that regard. That's one way you can do this, right? You can commit these things to prayer if there's things that you don't necessarily appreciate as much, etc., right? From a physical standpoint, mainly is what we're talking about here, but that's one thing you can do. Now, another thing you can do, this is more so for the actual individual, is you can say, like, some of the things you should be thinking about is, well, okay, cool, like, you may be the weight you are, since we talked about being overweight, right? You may not give your spouse as many compliments as they deserve. These are things internally you should be looking at as a married partner and say, okay, cool, like, if I compliment more, if I get in better shape, these are things that can make the marriage even better. These are things that will likely make the marriage last longer, right? Be more vibrant. People will be more energetic, all these different kind of things. And in those scenarios, what happens? You can put yourself in a position where the onus is on you. You take more time to basically focus on these things and actually build the marriage that way. Another thing you can do is, which is kind of another free one I can give you, is really you can just do these things as a team. You don't have to necessarily say, look to your spouse like, you're overweight. Like, excuse me, maybe you're not in the best condition as well. You can say, well, look, let's do this together. Why don't we do something together? You're doing things together, which is obviously great for marriage building, but at the same time, you can like do something at the same time which gets you closer to that desired goal, which is ultimately a better marriage, right? So those are just a couple of things ultimately we can basically get into in regards to what we basically talked about. Right? Now let's continue and see specifically what she continues to say. Because remember, this is all about wives speaking about their husbands, right? How you speak in that regard. Now, what does she say next? So now she wraps up this part by saying his mouth most sweet. And this is synonymous with one of the things he said in part 1 of the series, right? And I'll show you this quickly, because he said something along the same lines right here, as you can see. He said her speech comely, right? So he talked about her lips for the first time. He talks about her lips again a second time later on. But he talks about her speech being comely, right? Which is like, it's good, it's lovely, right? And you can see a lot of the parallels in both scenarios, because she's now talking about his mouth being sweet, most sweet, right? So it's that kind of, if you think about it, she's not only just saying it's sweet, it's most sweet, which is even more profound. Now, what does she say? And she says he's altogether lovely, right? And she ties this part off by saying this is her beloved and this is her friend, O daughters of Jerusalem. So notice from up here, which is really the chief piece of scripture, right? Really, you can go from here. It talks about old daughters of Jerusalem, but really from here, right, it's sandwiched in between old daughters of Jerusalem. So you can see specifically, she's highlighting, look, this is the case she presented to the daughters of Jerusalem about her beloved, right? And she also calls him a friend. Now, it's interesting when you look at some of like the pronouns they basically use, right? Because what does he say? He calls her generally his love. He also calls her like his sister, right? And he calls her as his spouse ultimately. But notice she's all on beloved, 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 right? But also she calls him friend. And you can see that even previously in the text as well, right? When she says that here, etc. Now, the way we tie this one in, okay, is she presents this case. Remember, this was the case in regards to why your beloved is more special than someone else's beloved, right? And what does this whole like presentation she's outpoured, right, do? Because remember, she's looking for her beloved in this particular scenario, right, to get back to the previous pleasures that she was describing previously. And what does she say? Or what does the scripture say? The scripture now says this next, which is really significant. It says, remember who she's speaking to, right? She's speaking to the daughters of Jerusalem, right? That's how it started, and that's how she kind of wrapped up. And what does this say? It says, whither, so where is thy beloved gone? Oh, what does she say? Oh, thou fairest among women, right? That was a statement we saw previously, right? And that statement comes up again. Where is thy beloved gone? Whither is thy beloved gone? Oh, thou fairest among women. That's talk. So they're talking to her. Whither is thy beloved turned aside? So where's he gone? Where's he turned aside? What? And this is the powerful thing. This is why we framed it speak about, because what did they say? That we may do what? What did they say they want to do? What did they say they want to do with her now, based on her whole presentation? Right in the chat box, what does it say? They hear this whole presentation. He's the chiefest among men. His legs are like pillars, socketed or in gold, etc. All these different kind of things. His cheeks, his eyes are like doves. His hands are like gold. He's this, his that, his lips. And what did they say? After this whole thing that has been said, they say, where is your beloved? Where's he gone? Where did he turn aside? Why? That we may seek him with thee. Now, why is this significant? Because basically what she said, all of the things she said did what? Made them believers too. Zeke Diligent says, seek him out too. Correct, right? Now, imagine that. These were the same people talking about this previously. What's so special about this guy? Look, she comes and she says, look, where is he? Because me says, seek him with you. Correct, right? She comes, look, where is he? I want him back, right? Bring him back to me so we can return to our previous pleasures. And what did they say? What's so special about him? That you're speaking to us like this, that you're commanding us like this. She now gives the whole presentation. Then they turn around and go from, okay, like, who is he? Why is he so special? To, where is he? Where did he go? So we can actually help you find him, right? So just notice from the way she spoke about him, made these women believers in her searching for him. So the things she said about him were that powerful that people around could hear about him and actually think, okay, cool, wow, like this guy must be special. Let's actually go and look for him with her, right? So imagine that. Imagine a wife who's speaking about her husband so confidently, so specially, that other people around are convinced and are like, okay, wow, like this guy is really worth searching for, worth fighting for, worth looking for, etc. Okay, and notice she goes on to say, look, the beloved is gone, etc., somewhere else, right? Basically. And the reason that's significant is maybe not so for today's topic, but definitely for a future topic, which I'll probably be doing really soon. Is, again, I talked about this previously. There's a lot of discussion of like what's going on in the book of Song of Solomon. I'm not necessarily talking about doing a step-by-step study. I posted a link to a study that basically started today ultimately in regards to Song of Solomon, which I believe is going to be a step-by-step study by Alan Parr from The Beat, right? That was in yesterday's link and yesterday's live show. Maybe before we wrap up today, I'll probably get the link again for anyone who's interested in that kind of thing. That's not something I'm necessarily going to be doing. Most likely that's anytime soon. But then at the same time, I know that's something that's actually going on actively right now, just for the record. But just notice this, right? They asked, like, we want to search for him. Where is he gone? And she basically goes on to talk about, oh, he's gone somewhere, basically. And she basically ultimately finds him again, ultimately, in regards to the narrative. But again, read the book of Song of Solomon in for yourself to get your own context and see these kind of things ultimately, right? But just notice this. You can see just how powerful her words were. Even if you look at her words in comparison to his words from yesterday's part 1, right? And just notice they both went in, which is powerful. And I was all basically cut up about it, just highlighting the fact that, look, the way this guy Solomon is complimenting his spouse, right? Like, he's going next level. And I thought I had some words, right? But he's giving even more examples of just the layers and the levels of complimentary things you can say to your spouse ultimately. And this is ultimately what we want to do every time we go to the Bible. So from yesterday's part in regards to husbands, what do? We say, okay, we're learning the Bible, right? Okay, this is what the Bible's saying, but also living the Bible, right? So how can we apply these things to our personal life? How can we personally apply? What's the personal application, right? So one of the things I take away is, look, this is a prime example of deep compliments about a spouse. Let me think about how I can make sure I'm complimenting my wife even more, right? Specifically to her, because she likes those things, right? Generally, that's what a wife likes. One of the things she likes. It's not the only thing she likes, but it's one thing, right? Compliments. We talked about like touching and like sexual pleasures ultimately, which are really like plain for you to see in just the plain readings of the text, right? And those are things that they did together in agreement, which is synonymous with what we talked about yesterday in regards to 1 Corinthians and those kind of things that Paul wrote, which basically line up with this. Basically, you are consensual. One doesn't prohibit the other. Another doesn't prohibit the other. You both do these things in agreement together, ultimately in love. And it's not necessarily a forced thing or a dictatorship in the sense of, I need it right now, so you give it to me, or you're not getting any tonight or this week, etc. The only times those kind of things will happen is if, based on what the scripture says, people are in agreement ultimately, right? And then obviously today we looked at it from the female's perspective, from the wife's perspective, right? Like, this is how she was speaking about her beloved, right? Her beloved to others. And it's something that husbands love greatly when their wives speak about them, not only to themselves, to them, but also publicly. And it's something that makes the husband feel good, because it's like, okay, wow, like she really does believe me. This is how much she believes in me. She's talking about it so significantly. And we tied it up by basically highlighting that, look, her words were so powerful. She basically convinced these women to say, look, we want to search for him with you. We want you to find him, etc. Because this is how significant it is, right? So let's look at some of these comments that have presented themselves today and see if we can find some stuff on the topic. If you've got questions on the topic today is wives, right? How wives can speak about their husbands in specific ways in order to bolster the marriage, right? In order to keep the marriage hot. So let's see. Cosmeo says she prays that we all have a productive and fruitful time in the word tonight, or afternoon or morning, depending where you are. Let's see what else we have. So Mr. Somebody asks, in thy word, is it true that some Christians say that she predicts the coming of Jesus? I talked about this yesterday. Like, some people will say those kind of things. Again, it's not really specific to the topic that we're talking about today, because let's say, for example, she doesn't predict the coming of Jesus, right? How does that have relevance to how a wife should speak about her husband? It doesn't, right? So therefore it's irrelevant. Let's see. Seek Diligence says, greetings all. May we all experience the grace of the Almighty God through today's live stream. Definitely. Mr. Somebody says, in that word, it's not a husband. Interesting. It's not. We can talk about that another day, because clearly that's not really the topic. But one way, let me not even go into that, to be honest. We can talk about that another time, because I think it's quite clear just from reading it that, like, what the scripture is saying and what it's not saying ultimately. So let's see. Then Mr. Somebody says, in that word, she's not talking about a person that exists in her time. She's believed to be Solomon's wife and says that she is beaten. Why would she be beaten when she wants to meet her husband? Why is she so desperately waiting? Okay, it's another question, not on topic, in my opinion. But then at the same time, it's like, one thing I'll say is, like, it's easily understandable. I guess you're necessarily taking that literally, right? Not to say you shouldn't take that literally, but if you're going to do that, then logically you have to take everything literally, and then you're going to become undone in that scenario. So, excuse me, that's what I'll say for now in regards to this. But again, like I said at the top of the stream, this isn't something that I'm necessarily running away from. Like, I don't run away from anything in the Bible. But again, this isn't the topic specifically. If you've got questions or statements on a wife basically speaking about a husband in a positive manner, bring them up and we can discuss those. But this is not what we're going to talk about on today's live stream. Let's see. Ecosmia says they'd probably be pleased too if they were in better shape. And yeah, we talked about that quite a bit. Like, definitely, like, even just to reference Corinthians as well, again, when Paul talks about this stuff, it's like, he talks about, look, husbands look to try and please their wives and wives look to try and please their husbands. So if I'll put it like this, if she's talking about, let's go back there again, right? I'll just highlight this quickly, since this is on the topic of like speaking positively, right? And something she said. So if you look at this, for example, where she's basically talking about like his legs, right? And like she's saying, look, his legs, pillars of marble, right? Set upon sockets of fine gold. And it's like, are you necessarily going to, and this goes back to what I was talking about in regards to like the truth of the matter, right? So like, let's go back to the overweight example. Is a wife, like that's being truthful, going to like liken, if she's talking about physical attributes as well, right? Is she going to liken her husband's legs to pillars, right? If he's got some fat, dirty, raggedy old leg, like, I don't know if you'd reference those to pillars, right? So again, she talked about his belly, right? And what does she say? She said his belly is bright ivory overlaid with sapphires. And again, like, I'm not saying that everything is necessarily going to be a spiritual thing, but then at the same time, like, you think about it from that perspective, is she going to be complimenting this a husband, right, whose belly is like just flabby all over the place, right? And again, ultimately, like, I want to say this as well, this isn't to condemn anyone who's overweight or like has changeable, notice this, right, changeable physical attributes, right? Certain things we cannot change, right, about our physical nature. Certain things we can change about her physical nature, about his physical nature. There's certain things you can change. So a guy that's overweight, that's an example we've continued to talk about in today's video, right, in today's live stream. That is something you can change. You can definitely change that by being more disciplined, by being more like mindful in regards to the things that you're actually eating, right? Or the things that you're not eating. That's something you can change. You can change the volume of compliments you shower your spouse with, right? You can change the amount of things you say publicly about your spouse, knowing that those are things that he may like or she may like, right? There's certain things you can change about, like, for example, like your hair. You may not be able to, well, in the day and age we live in, there's all like different things you can do to change your hair. I'm not going to get into that in today's video. That might be, like, start up a storm, right? But like, let's just stick from a natural perspective, right? Like, generally, men can grow their hair longer. They can cut their hair shorter, right? There's different things that a man can do to his hair. There's different things a woman can do to her hair, right? Those are things you can change. You can change the fragrances you wear. You can change the clothes you wear. Now, again, I said this yesterday, I'll say this again. This isn't unbooking a vacuum in the Bible. This is just one piece of the bigger puzzle, right? So we don't just, okay, look, you know what? My only goal in life is to please my spouse. Like, no, right? Ultimately, your first and most important call is to your maker, right? To be devoted to him. But in that regard, like, that doesn't mean you now disregard your spouse or you disregard other people. Obviously, God says love him with everything, but also love your neighbor as you love yourself, right? So you show your neighbor the same like love that you show yourself ultimately. So you think about it from that perspective, like, there's things you can physically change. There's certain things you cannot physically change. And ultimately, like, you're stuck with them, right? You have to just put up with them. None of us, except Christ, is perfect. So if you think about it from that perspective, or perfect by themselves, right? So you think about it from that perspective, there's certain things that are imperfect about me. There's certain things that are imperfect about my wife, right? It doesn't mean that, okay, cool, because that's just the reality, we now go and spend all of this time speaking about these things between each other. No, like, you obviously have to be wise with these kind of things. Use your words wisely. Don't lie. Don't ever deceive, right, your spouse. But you mention certain things and you maybe don't mention other things, or you mention them with more thought because there may be things that are like could be problematic in some ways. There could be things that cause issues. So the point I'm making is, like, this isn't to condemn anyone that has changeable physical characteristics, physical natures, right? Like, there's certain things you can change. Again, like I said, these are things you can commit to prayer. These are certain things you can try and just commit to be more disciplined on, these kind of things. And ultimately, these are things that will actually be more of a benefit, not only to you, but to the spouse, but also to the marriage as a whole, which is obviously both of you as well. Okay, so just think about it from that perspective, right? Being in better shape generally is always going to be a good thing for the spouse, like both spouses, right? All right. What else do we see? Mr. Somebody's quoting Hebrew, which is interesting because I'm not a scholar in Hebrew, but even I know that what he's quoting in Hebrew is actually incorrect, just for the record. Again, that's not on today's topic, so I'm not going to touch that, but I'll just give you that nice and loving piece of correction there. Let's see. Mr. Somebody says, I ain't that word. Did she at least find her beloved? Well, I kind of mentioned this. It's firstly, just for the record as well, her finding him again is irrelevant to the topic, just for the first and foremost. So the reason I'm going to mention this and address this a little bit is because it'll be clear why I'll address this. But firstly, it's not on the topic because whether she found him or not has no relevance to how a wife should speak about her spouse. It's irrelevant to that topic. Firstly, the only reason I'll mention is, like I said, is because ultimately during the live stream today, I actually did talk about how if you read through before and you read after, you'll see that firstly, losing, so to speak, him leaving for a season was not new. This isn't the first time we see this in the book. And so just for the record, I did mention that previously in the live stream if you were paying attention and listening to what I was actually saying. Just for the record, right? Next, what else do we have? Give me 2 seconds. We have Cosmios says, it's true, some people only know how to talk down about their spouse to other people, and that's like sadly, like from a Christian perspective, let me not speak generally because we're talking about the Bible, right? So this is from a Christian standpoint for Christians, ultimately, first and foremost. This is something that people that aren't Christians can benefit from too, ultimately, if they follow the insights, right, and the commandments. But then at the same time, like, definitely a Christian who's reading the Bible should not be in those scenarios, like thinking about these kind of things, right? So you think about it from that perspective. All right. So just notice it from that scenario. Like, you shouldn't necessarily be thinking about it from that perspective. But yeah, like, you should. I mentioned this yesterday in yesterday's live stream. One thing that's more significant is sometimes saying nothing is better than opening your mouth, right? Sometimes I said it this way. Sometimes not saying anything is a compliment, because the things you'll say will actually be detrimental and will be the opposite of a compliment, right? And the fact is, I mentioned this in today's live stream as well, like certain times, like, you have to be careful what you say and the things you speak about. So if you don't have anything good to say about a specific topic in regards to, like, your spouse, like, be thoughtful of how you open your mouth. It's not just because, okay, look, let's say a spouse had like a glaring blemish on, like, their face, right? That's a true statement. That's a fact, right? So therefore, someone could say, well, it's true. So I'm just going to say, oh, like that thing on their face, like they just don't like it. Right? And it's like, someone could say, well, like, what did they do though? It's true. But yes, we know it's true. But there's a way to deliver a message, right? You can basically say things in certain ways. Like an example, this isn't a topical example. Well, let me even bring that up, okay? Because that's going to be me going off topic, and I don't want to do that. But like, we have to get in the habit more so of Christians complimenting our spouses in the right way. And sometimes, like, you should never make a habit of just talking down to your spouse, right? Or talking just outwardly, publicly about a spouse in a negative light. Even if it's true. Why? Because you're a team. And if someone in the team is suffering, everyone is suffering. That's a mistake. I'm telling you this now from personal experience, but also from observation as well. Like, one of the big things in a marriage that will definitely skyrocket it is when both of the spouses, if not just one of the spouses, begins to realize that the marriage is a team effort, that it's a team. When one person's failing, they are both failing. It's not, oh, you are failing and they're not failing. No, it's they are failing. You'd say we are failing, right? That's the scenario. So if you think about it from that perspective, once even one person in the marriage realizes that and begins to act accordingly, like, I'm not guaranteeing this because I can't do that, but then at the same time, right, like, you have to remember that you're moving in the right direction. So spouses that think that, look, this is his and hers and it's separate and there's no teamwork, you'll continue to have problems. It doesn't mean every day is going to be a problem, okay? It doesn't. But you prohibit yourself from attaining levels that are really, like, significant. So I mentioned this previously, okay, even before I saw Ecosmos's comment, which I think is really powerful, about loving your neighbor as you love yourself, right? And the New Testament is flooded with scriptures about just a husband's loving his wife, right? Like Christ loved the church and these kind of things and gave his life for the church, right? You think about it from these perspectives. When you go out and you basically ridicule and you talk down about your spouse publicly, you're talking down about yourself, right? Because the Christian doctrine teaches that husbands and wives are one, right? They're no longer two flesh, they're now one flesh, right? And if God has joined them together, as Jesus said, let not man put them asunder, right? Let not man break it up. So you think about it from that perspective. When you go out and you insult publicly, you're insulting yourself. You really don't want to do that. You really shouldn't do that. You should be doing the opposite. You should be speaking her up. You should be speaking him up. This is basically what we talked about heavily today. Not necessarily because the spouse needed it in this scenario, but because she was basically testifying her heart's desire, etc., and basically highlighting these kind of things, just for the record, right? Let's see. So hopefully that helps for anyone out there who may be struggling with those kind of things. Let's see. Ecosmith says, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button if you've gained some knowledge of this stream and is building you up. Definitely make sure you hit the thumbs up button. Goes a long way. Appreciate it anyway. Let's see. Let's see. This is somebody saying, okay, after the stream, go check it. I don't need to check it because I know how it's written and it's not how you quoted it. So you should really go and check it, to be honest. Let's see. Frandel's in the house. He says, Shalom Israel. Hope you're doing good. Shalom. Frandel, sorry. Shalom to you too. Ecosmir says, zipping your mouth is a compliment. Definitely. Emmanuel Roro is here. He says, love you. God bless you, man. From Israel. Definitely welcome, Emmanuel from Israel. Hope you're doing good. Yeah, like, let's see. Any questions? More questions on the wife, right? A wife speaking about her husband. Like, can people see, from those of you who've been here for the most part of today's teaching, like how a woman speaking this way about a spouse can be very beneficial to the marriage, but also like ultimately to herself as well, because if you believe something and you speak about it more and more, it's like that will lift you up more, and that can build your confidence more, and realizing that this is actually who you're with, etc. So excuse me, it's not just about compliments. Okay, I don't want you to mistake that. I don't want you to mistake just thinking that, look, all we're talking about today is compliments. Like, the compliment that we've discussed over the 2 parts over 2 days is ultimately, it is like a catalyst. I'll put it like that. It's a catalyst to bigger and better things. Like, you compliment your spouse in these ways that we've kind of discussed over these 2 days, it will provide you with more like solace from your marriage, right? Much more. So if you think about it from that perspective, like it's really interesting that we take what we've talked about today, and we actually like really consider them strongly. So like, before we wrap up, a couple of things I'll say which I think are really interesting, just kind of covering this 2-part series, right? Because Miss is saying as well, she can see how it's beneficial, definitely a confidence booster. Thank you for that. One thing I'll say is this: like, we've talked about Song of Solomon, 2-part. I think they were very beneficial. I know people have been benefit from it already from certain comments over the 2 sessions, but also myself personally, I don't go through these kind of things to not try and benefit as well. And hopefully people have been able to see, and Nikozmia says, plus, as I said, it's easy to focus on someone's negatives and forget their positives, but you're also reminding yourself, definitely. So like what I was basically saying is, I hope people have been able to see, and I know people have been able to see, like how even a book that maybe a lot of people don't actually read too often is actually beneficial for you to read, and how you can actually garner a lot of like context and lessons from what we've actually covered in regards to the Song of Solomon. And I hopefully that can be a catalyst and inspire you to go and look at some other books in the Bible that you may have skimmed through or you may have looked over previously, and you'll be able to garner a lot more benefits, right? From those books. Now, this was a bit different for me, as many of you who've watched more of my videos would know, is we generally like really hone in on scriptures. Frandel M says he agrees with E Cosmios. Thank you for that as well, Frandel. Now, like, generally what I do with scriptures is, with Bible text in videos, is we're normally breaking things down step by step. Now, we basically did this. I didn't necessarily focus on one line and stuff like this, or jump around per se, right? Mrs. Akanwin says it was an amazing stream tonight. Thanks, Brother Israel. Thank you, Mrs. Akanwin, for the kind words and the encouragement and exhortation. Really appreciate it. Now, Song of Solomon, just like many books, like there's people, I know yesterday Issachar Sky was on with us and she was saying, look, she doesn't think like she's read the book. She may have just skimmed it. Hopefully this has been encouragement for you to see that, look, there's blessings and benefits in all books of the Bible. Even some of the books that are maybe that some of the most obscure books in people's minds. They may think, look, like, why would I read this book? Like, even yesterday somebody was saying, like, why would this book be in the Bible? Like, talking about these kind of things, right? But ultimately you can see, like, there's married people here that have been with us live over 2 sessions, not just myself, just for the record. Whether they want to make themselves known is up to them. But also think about people that watch this on the replay and that are married and will get blessings from it, right? And stuff like that. But you think about it from that perspective, it's like there's clear signs why the book of Song of Solomon is beneficial for Christians today, as well as at a time when it was basically transpiring, and for the people in those days that were hearing these things. But again, it was definitely different. Like, we did cover pieces of text. We didn't necessarily go into major context about many of these things. It wasn't necessarily a thesis on doctrinal statement about this is what the Book of Song of Solomon actually is. And I don't want to say sad, like maybe from the flesh is a sad thing, because if I'm honest, I don't foresee me doing a study on the Book of Song of Solomon anytime soon, in that regard, right? But what I'll say is, one thing I'll say, somebody saying, don't twist his words. Yesterday you asked where's the wisdom of Song of Solomon. I believe he was going a bit further than that, to be honest. And ultimately, the record is there pretty much for people to go back and watch and see what you were saying. But let me not get distracted, ultimately. But the point I'm making is, I don't foresee myself, if I'm honest, doing a study on Song of Solomon in that regard anytime soon, basically, where I'm going to go step by step through these kind of things and be able to pull out many of just the nuances in the Song of Solomon, in that regard. I did talk about, and since I mentioned this, I did talk about that yesterday, and what I can do is I'll provide the link again, right, to this series that's actually, I guess it just started today. For those of you who are interested, and there's like, just for the record as well, it's not like there's no specific like personal like reason why I'm like go and watch this per se, right? But this is what I believe to be a fellow brother in Christ. He's doing a series on this. His first session was today, where he basically said he's going through it step by step. I've been able to follow through it. I don't know if I will follow through with it, but at the same time, this is from a guy named Alan Parr. If you don't know who he is, his channel is The Beat, Biblical Encouragement and Truth, something along those lines. And he's doing a session on like series on this stuff. And again, he's not the only one who's doing these kind of things. There's probably other people that have done this in the past, obviously. This is just a reference to someone who I know is actively doing something like this just as we speak, metaphorically speaking. Now, one thing I know I'm going to be doing, which will be interesting, is, and this is going to be very soon, so I'm sort of happy about this, but like I said, it would be really, like, I'd really enjoy to go through Song of Solomon step by step and break a lot of the stuff down, because there's a lot of nuance in there. There's a lot of things that are actually really significant. I've highlighted some of the things previously, but one thing I definitely will be doing very soon, I'm not going to give you a specific date yet. It may be tomorrow, it may be the day after, it may be the day after that, is we're going to get into Song of Solomon, right, 5, and what is referenced as verse 16, right? And why are we going to get into that, or why is that so? Well, it depends how you look at it, to be honest. It's not contentious to me, to be honest, but there are some people out there that, and you've seen some of that stuff in the chat already today, so there are some people out there that believe something completely different is going on in Song of Solomon, and we are basically going to take time and step by step work through it and just highlight clearly who Song of Solomon 5:16, as is referenced today, is about, and categorically who it is not about. So I know some of you have been excited and been like uncontrollable in many ways to get to that piece of text and to highlight certain things and to all of a sudden transform into Hebrew scholars and people that have never read the Book of Song of Solomon all of a sudden know Song of Solomon and all of these kind of things. So again, I always say this, like I say it more and more, I say it more and more each day, like there's no rush, right? Like there's no rush to learn something specific about the Bible, unless it's salvation related. When salvation is easy for a Christian, right? It's easy to know what salvation is. That's the only rush you need as if you're not a Christian. The only rush you need is to become a Christian, ultimately. That's it. Everything else, in the bigger scheme of things, is secondary. If you're saved, you've punched the ticket, right? Everything else is not important. And I don't say that to run away from stuff. Like, again, like I find a lot of safety and security and like grounding in the Bible. So if you don't know already, I love talking about the Bible. I love talking about everything in the Bible. So yeah, like obviously people have been able to see over the last 2 sessions, Mr. Somebody has been really excited about highlighting certain things. And again, you have your day ultimately to ask those questions that you've been asking, trying to distract the 2 sessions in over the last 2 days, and basically like have those questions answered. Ultimately, it's about truth, right? And as we go through the scriptures, one can only be honest as a Christian and look at what the Bible says, look at what the Bible doesn't say, and come to conclusions ultimately. So from that standpoint, Mr. Somebody obviously believes the prophet in his religion of Islam is mentioned, is referenced in Song of Solomon. This will give you, the reason I'm saying this now, right? Frandel M says the answer through the words of God, definitely. The reason I'm making this announcement now, one reason definitely is so you can be prepared, right? You can bring the best questions, your best debates. I'm likely going to look at the best of the best from the Islamic perspective and go from there. Because when we do things scripturally, in a lot of ways, you want to do them categorically, right? You want to leave no stone unturned. Cosmeo said yesterday, Solomon left no stone unturned in regards to the compliments. He went from head to toe. And if you read through the whole book of Solomon, Song of Solomon, he literally he actually wanted to go back and literally just like write down every single compliment he gave his spouse, right? And the different body parts to see if we get there. Let's see. So okay, look, like Mr. Somebody, like he's saying, look, in the word, okay, so can I begin to talk one point? No, like this isn't, we're not there yet. Like be patient, all right? You said you need that, you want me to know that you're not insulting, you just want answers and how you explain your point. Thanks. Well, it's debatable. Like some people will view it as you're insulting. It depends how you say things. If you think about what we talked about today, we talked about a lot of positivity in regards to a wife and a husband, but then at the same time, you have to think about it from the perspective of, what did I say? There's certain times you say things, there's ways you can say them. And like people are listening, people are watching, people see these kind of things. But again, I know you're eager to try and evangelize some of the things you say, but then at the same time, there's a time and a place and a topic. This hasn't been the topic for those kind of discussions. Our next video will be on that topic. And again, this goes not only to Mr. Somebody and any other Muslims that basically decide to join the live stream when it happens, but also for us, for Christians, that we have to realize just because we have truth, there's ways to deliver truth, right? This is exactly what I talked about in today's live stream about physical unpleasant characteristics from your vantage point. You may see things you don't like. It doesn't mean you have to necessarily talk about them, right? But then at the same time, like, you can deliver truths that are not going to be nice to hear for someone else, but in a particular way, right? You can, yes, go full gung-ho and say, oh, this and that. But at the same time, like, There's nothing that says you have to do it that way. You can do it another way. All right. Mr. Somebody says, in that word, when he sees Christians insulting him a lot, he asks Christians if they hate his religion, basically. And they say they're saying facts. And again, this is what I'm talking about now. Like you can deliver facts to someone. You can deliver fact to someone that will be definitely hard for someone to hear. And ultimately, it's about wisdom. You can say, look, if someone came and started insulting like my spouse, right, in a particular way, even if the things were true, like, it doesn't mean it's wrong to deliver a message that way, just for the record. But you have to think about, well, is this person going to understand, even actually logically perceive what I'm saying, or are they going to, or is it likely? It's not a guarantee. Some people can be shouting at someone vitriol and it be true, but still get the message. But we know most likely, and I've said this in weeks previously, right? When it comes to loving others, one task I give people, a basic task I say is like, look, you put yourself in their position. If you were in their position, what would you like personally? Would you like someone to insult you all over the place? Would you like someone to shout you all over the place? Or would you like someone to have just a standard kind of conversation? It doesn't need to be the most softest. It doesn't need to be the most gentlest. But just think about this. Most people, if they're honest, they're going to say, look, I'd at least start off talking generally in a cordial manner. It's not to say it won't get more heated, it won't get more intense. But the internet is a place where, like, it's almost like people are having conversations all the time without having conversations. So when it actually gets to the conversation, it's like you're ready to go full gung-ho fighting mode. And we have to remember, like, we don't see people on the street and just start throwing accusations at them, punching each other and all these kind of things. Like, you have a conversation, right? So the fact of the matter is, Mr. Somebody's been in and around my channel for a couple of months now, and he'll say certain things. Like, I know in certain aspects I can at least justify in my own mind why I could respond to him in certain ways, but I still personally choose not to, right? That's just me. I want to deliver a message logically, coherently, and in a way that, in my opinion, like, I know I've presented a case that anyone logical listening to what I'm saying can actually perceive. Doesn't mean someone shouting at you or someone throwing insults, which may be true, right? And this is where nuance comes into it, because certain things happen, certain things are said which are true. And because you don't like them, it doesn't necessarily mean they shouldn't be said. But again, just because you know something is true, it doesn't mean you have to say it in a certain way. That's just common logic. And that's not to condemn or to compliment anyone, ultimately, as well, right? Frandel M says we use discernment. And again, like, we've talked about different things before. I'm sure we'll talk about different things in the future as well. But then at the same time, it's like, again, let's not get into side chat. Let's not get distracted, ultimately, right? Just because the topic at hand is done, it doesn't mean, like, in our closing statements we now start taking it into something else, like, drastically. We've gone all this way merely just by talking about, look, Song of Solomon is going to come back up again, but not necessarily in the way I personally feel is best. But ultimately, this is just another example of, like, God is more important to me than myself in that regard. So I already know, doing this 2-part session, like, I didn't really want to do this in a lot of ways, but I just kind of said, you know what, God, I'll let you take control. I know you're not going to tell me to do this thing because there's not glory that you're going to be able to get from. You're not going to be able to get from this. You're going to get glory from this scenario. People are going to be blessed, and it just so turned out that it has nicely put us in a situation where, like, it so nicely flows us into the next topic we're going to cover in regards to Song of Solomon. So yeah, that's pretty much it for today's live stream, guys and girls. Hope this has actually been a very beneficial 2-part series for you. Whether you're a husband, whether you're a wife, whether you're approaching husbandship or wifeship. And again, like I said, the next time we're going to touch Song of Solomon, we are going to be jumping into if Song of Solomon 5:16 is talking about the Prophet of Islam, as crazy as that sounds, or just literally talking about Solomon and the spouse. So again, I look forward to that session, and hopefully it can be a benefit to all of us. From a Muslim's perspective, I hope Mr. Somebody comes to the session and enjoys it and is truthful to what the Bible actually says in context. And I hope from a Christian perspective, this is just going to be another example of how you can defend the Bible, which doesn't even need defense. You can just present the defense that the Bible gives to others, and know how to actually use the scripture. Okay, so yeah, on that note, I'll wrap it up. One video I recommend that you should watch is a very powerful video. I did this a couple of years ago, and since we talked about wives, it's a video about great women in the Bible. This is actually the first video in a series which we haven't added to since then, and it has been on my mind ultimately different times, but it's a video that you can watch about great women in the Bible. And I did something different with this one. I basically went with women. The essence of this is to try and go with women that are not so necessarily known in the scripture, great women that are sort of under the radar in many different ways. So you can definitely consider watching that next on after the live stream if you want to look for another video for us to watch. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks and take care, and God bless.